You know, in fishing nowadays, we live in a world that is consumed with forward-facing sonar and all the new technology that has came out. And man, all those things are great, and they have absolutely changed fishing. But I'm going to talk to you today about one of the simplest things when it comes to fishing, and it's something that I love to do, and I love to do it because it is so simple, and it's something that I grew up doing, and it's something that everybody, no matter what skill level, any of your upper skill level anglers are going to watch this and be like, oh yeah, I know already. But if you're new to trying to run new water, or if you're new to bass fishing and you're not, currently operating or using a lot of the forward facing like live scope, and you want to be able to just look at a body of water and say, okay, here's a good starting point. I'm going to give that to you today, especially in the spring of the year and in the fall, and that is fishing transition banks. Transition banks play a huge role on practically any body of water that there is. I don't know anywhere you can go, or very few places you can go, where fish are not going to use good natural transition banks. What I'm talking about when I say a transition bank, if you look at this shoreline, you've got a very, very steep main lake point, and it goes back into a very flat bay or pocket, whatever you want to call it. And between the back of that pocket and this main lake point, you've got where the shoreline makes a transition. And what that means is it goes from being steep, it turns to a 45, and then it turns into a flat, more like a flat body or bottom. And along that, you've got all different sorts of changes. The back of the pocket is sand. The main lake point is big, huge chunk slate granite rock. And then in the middle section of it, you've actually got some areas where it's smaller cobble-sized rock and some gravel mixed in. Now, what makes these banks so special is fish really love to use this because they have a lot of options here in the spring and the fall. The weather's always changing. It's cold one day, it's hot one day. It's, the fish can move or match what Mother Nature throws at them without having to swim any great distance. They can move 50 feet down this bank and be comfortable, or if it warms up, they can move 50 foot up this bank. So in the springtime, when you have fish migrating into to these pockets and stuff to spawn, they're going to naturally want to stage on these transition banks. In the fall of the year, when the vegetation and stuff in the back of these pockets starts to die, and the resident fish that are living back there start to move out to the main lake to seek shelter from the colder water, the exact same thing applies. They're going to use places on this transition banks. Now, why I love fishing this so much is because when fish are on this type pattern, it is exactly that. It's a pattern. So you never run out of it if you're on a big enough lake. And it's very, very specific, and this is one of those deals where you can get to where you can call your shot. And what I mean by that is you can fish 2 or 3 little stretches of shoreline like this and very quickly determine where these fish are at. Are they all the way out here on the end? Are they all the way in the back corner? Are they where it changes from sand to gravel? Are they where it changes from gravel to the bigger rock? Are they on the very first part of the bank that's steep, or the very first part of the bank that's flat? Once you fish a couple of them and pay attention to where you get bit, you can take that and you can run all over the lake and make it apply. So you're eliminating miles and miles and miles of effortless fishing, because now you can pinpoint exactly what, and some transition shorelines are going to be much bigger than this, obviously, but you can take, if you put it on a percentage, you can take and say, okay, I need to fish this 20%, which on this bank might be 50 yards. On another bank, it might be 100 yards. On another bank, it might only be 10 or 15 feet. But once you learn that, you can take that, you can put your trolling motor down and pick it up a whole bunch of times in the course of the day, and you can run that as a pattern, and you can catch a tremendous amount of fish. And it's very simple, it's very visual, and it's one of those things for me that's very special when it happens every year. And honestly, it's probably overlooked a lot more now because of all the new electronics that we have. There's less and less people doing this. But your electronics do play a big role in being able to look at your mapping and run that as a pattern, especially on a lake that you're unfamiliar with, which I tend to always find myself on. It's very important to be able to look at these, to look at your mapping and say, okay, this sets up right, this sets up right, this sets up right, this sets up right. And then once you identify where those fish are at, you can just run and gun, which is my favorite way to fish, and you're doing it in a very high percentage process. As far as baits go, if I had to pick 3 lures to go fish transition banks with in the spring and in the fall, I'm gonna pick a jig. And again, what jig would all be based on the lake and what habitats in the lake and the type of shoreline that we have. But I'm gonna pick a jig, I'm gonna pick a jerk bait, and I'm gonna pick a crankbait. If you want 3 lure choices or categories to put to work on these transition banks, in the fall, a lot of times the top water can be efficient on them. But as far as spring and fall is concerned, the jerk bait, a jig, and a crankbait of various different types. It might be a square bill crankbait. It might be a crankbait that runs 12 or 14 foot deep. It might be a shallow running jerk bait. It might be a deep running jerk bait. It might be a little bitty small tiny finesse jig, or it might be a 3/4 ounce football head jig. Just all depending on where these fish are located at on this type of shoreline. But those 3 lures, if you have them in your boat when you go try to put this into use, you should have what you need to get it done. So transition banks are special to me. When I first started traveling and fishing over the country, this is one of the first things that I learned, because it's truly not. So we do have this where I live in the fish the Louisiana Delta. It does exist, but it's not rock. But that kind of goes back to what I'm saying. The transition banks exist pretty much everywhere. Even down where I live in the marsh, it's still the same aspect. You have spawning areas, you have summering areas, and then you have those transitions where those fish are going to stage and where those fish are going to group and bunch. And even at home, still to this day, that's my favorite time of the year to fish. The Delta and the marsh is in that winter, early spring, and late fall transition, because that's when our fish get the most concentrated and the most bunched up and the most predictable, and that's what makes it the most fun for me. So I'm gonna take a minute and I'm gonna show you on my mapping what I'm looking for. If I'm launching my boat, you're gonna go try to put this to use, you can sit down before you go, look at your mapping, and say, here's a few things or a few areas or a few stretches that should have those transitions on them. And it's real simple. And then, like I said, the first 3 or 4 I fish, I'll probably fish the entirety of them just to kind of get a feel. And then once I have that going for me, once I know where on these stretches those fish are located, then I'm going to not even bother with all the rest of it. I'm just going to go fish that specific stretch. When I'm looking for transition areas and I'm looking at my Garmin and I'm trying to run this as a pattern, this is a prime example of what I'm looking for. I've got a main lake point right here that's got really deep water off of it. You can see out here where it's 70 to 80 foot deep. And then I've got a big bay right here in the back of this. You can tell how the contour lines are super tight right here, and they're real spread out back here. This area right here is what I'm calling the transition. So you've got deep water access, you've got shallow water, and then this is kind of your in-between. That's why it's called a transition. Now, all these banks are not going to be created the same. Some are going to be better than others. Some are going to contain a certain type of rock, maybe that you're keying on, or maybe you need wood cover along it, or maybe you need boat docks along it, or whatever it might possibly be. But this is what I'm looking for, and this is what I'm looking when I'm trying to run this as a pattern, is I'm looking for these areas, and then I'll just have to kind of investigate when I get there. Here's another one right here. It's kind of unique in the fact that, it's got more of a flat point, but it still has the same thing. You've got your steep contour lines out here, and then they tighten up here a little more. So you've kind of got more like of a channel swing type deal here. These are more of what I'm looking for, if I'm fishing when the first fish are first moving up in the spring, or if I'm fishing after maybe a strong cold front in the fall. you know, having that deep water access along that transition, a lot of times, you know, in the spring and the summer, you'll have a big concentration of fish that will bunch up right in an area like this. And this is something that you're not going to find typically as easily as you're going to find this. This is going to resist a tremendous amount more. The ones that have these cut faces like this can sometimes be really special, you know, and they're going to be all over anywhere you have, you know, deep water to shallow water. This is just a much bigger version here. You've got a big bay in the back here and a big main lake point, so you have a much larger area here to look at. It's also got some channel swing stuff, but that's primarily what I'm doing. And then as I get to each one, you know, I can run over here to this one. As I get to each one, I have to visually look at it. If it's something that I can tell that I'm keying on visual, like I said, if it's boat docks or if it's a certain type of rock, or maybe it's that it has to have grass on it, whatever that lake offers you. But that's how, you know, that's how I take my mapping and run around the lake and pinpoint those areas. Come here, baby. Come on. Oh, you're so pretty. Gotcha. That's why I love transition banks. It's one of the most visual aspects there is of bass fishing. That's such a beautiful fish. You know, and it gives me the ability to look at where I caught this fish and take it and apply it all over the lake, virtually eliminating so much water and making me so much more efficient and so much more productive throughout the course of the day. Something that you're not comfortable doing or that you haven't really thought about or paid attention to, is something you should definitely take the time to learn and give a try. I don't think it'll take you very long to pick up on it.